Let us now look at this sutram in detail. Tayoreva krityakta kalarthaha. As look at the vritti first. It says ete means all ete pratyayaha, which these affixes kritya affixes which we are discussing right now, and the affix kta which we will be discussing later, and kalarthaha, the affixes used in the same meaning as khal. So not only khal, but also affixes which are used in the same meaning as khal, kalarthaha. For the time being, we can ignore this kta and kalarthaha. We can ignore them. Later on, we'll be studying these rules. If you want, just very briefly, this affix kta, very important affix like kritam, hataha, dattam. This is a very, very important affix, but that's not today's topic. The affix we'll be studying in detail. Specifics we'll be looking at later on. So that pratyaha kta, it is given the sanya nishtha by ktaktavatu nishtha. The affix kta and ktavatu get the nishtha sanya. This is not today's topic, but since Panini has mentioned this affix kta in 3470, just want to give you a brief reference. What is this affix kta? So affix kta, this of course kakara is an it by lashakvatadite. This affix gets the nishtha sanya by ktaktavatu nishtha. Then Panini prescribes this affix nishtha to be used in various meanings. One of the most important one of these is 32102, which is a sutram nishtha itself. Now, as you may recall, this 32102 comes in the adhikara of bhute. So it's in a past tense. For example, Ramena Vali hataha. Vali was killed by Sri Ramaha. So hataha, that is the pratyakta, and so on and so forth. But let's not go into more details right now. So that is the affix kta, which we'll be discussing later. At that time, we will remind ourselves of this sutram, which is tayoreva krityakta kalarthaha. Now, what is this affix khal? That comes a little bit later in the Ashtadhyayi. It is in the third Titiya Pade, in the third quarter of the third chapter of the Ashtadhyayi. Ishadussushu krichra krichrartheshu khal. Affix khal is prescribed. For example, a word like dushkaram, idam karyam dushkaram, this is difficult to do. Durlabha, difficult to get, and so on. And then this sutram 3470 says khalarthaha, not only the affix khal prescribed by 33126, but also other affixes in the same meaning as khal. For example, is affix yuch. All this we'll look at detail later on. I just want to give you a reference point as to what is kta and what is khal. When we discuss these in detail, when we go into more specifics later on, we have to remind ourselves of this sutram 3470, which is tayoreva krityakta kalarthaha. Also, which I just told you, that is tayoho is bhava karmanoho eva, because anuvritti of bhava and karma comes in from the prior sutram, yes, correct, which is 3469, lah karmani cha bhave cha karmake bhyaha. So this is the anuvritti of karmani and bhave. Karmani is in saptami and bhave is in saptami. So tayoreva refers to bhava karmanoho eva. So the vritti says that ete bhava karmanoreva syuhu. So these affixes, the kritya affixes which we are talking about right now, the affix kta and the affix khal and other affixes used in the same meaning as that of khal, they all are to be used tayoreva. So they are not going to be used kartari. Kartari krit is the general rule, but this is an exception to kartari krit. Now bhava karmanoho, bhavaha, what is bhavaha? Bhava is referring to an action itself. Any dhatu conveys some action. That action is referred to as bhavaha. So, for example, let's take a quick example. Bhavata shaitavyam. So you should sleep. So it means that the action of sleeping should be done by you. It refers to the action itself. not to a physical object, or it's not an object, it just refers to the action itself. That's called bhava. Bhava means the sense of the verbal root. Sense means what? Verbal roots convey some action. So it's the action conveyed by the verbal root. That's called bhava. So bhave means in the sense of that action. Now, so example would be bhavata shaitavyam. It should be the action of sleeping should be done by you. Now, if this is because this action of sleeping is intransitive, there is no object here. That's why it is to be used in what we call in English the impersonal passive. Simply speaking, in English we can say that they are to be used only in the passive. These affixes, kritya pratyaha, kta pratyaha and kalarthaha, they are all to be used only in the passive. That would be the simple meaning of this sutram. We had a default sutram kartari krit, which was telling us to use every krit pratyaha in the active in the sense of the agent, but this sutram is an exception to that, telling us that these particular affixes are to be used only in the passive. Of course, if it's an intransitive verb, we can only convey the action itself. So like the act of sleeping should be done by you. In English you would say simply you should go to sleep. Now if if the dhatu is sakarmakaha, then we can have a karmani prayogaha, so which focuses on the object. So says it conveys the object. So kartavyaha, karaniyaha, kato bhavata. So you, the mat, kata is a mat. A mat ought to be made by you. So the mat should be made by you. So this is now talking about the mat, which is the object of the making. So this mat should be made by you. So this pratyaha tavya, which you're going to see very soon now in detail, and the aniya pratyaha, they are referring to the mat. So that is the object of the action. That's what karmani when they refer to the object of the action. So that is which is being done. So the mat should be done by you, should be made by you. The mat should be made by you. The mat ought to be made by you, or may be made by you. So these are the meanings in which these affixes are to be used. They are tayor eva, bhava karmanoho eva. So these affixes, kritya pratyaha, the kta pratyaha and the kharthaha pratyaha, they are to be used only in the passive. So the English vritya put over here is the affixes having the designation of kritya, which we just saw is an adhikara going from 3195 to 31132, which is the topic right now. The affix ta, which we study later on, and the affixes having the sense of kal, which I put the reference here from 33126 is kal, and other affixes in the sense of kal. They are to be used to denote the action or the object. It says note. Now if put a note over here is bhave. In bhave prayoga, since we are referring to a action, a single action, it is outsargikam ekavachanam klibatvam cha. So bhave prayoga, okay, when used in bhave prayoga, the declension like shaitavyam, maya atra nastatavyam, I should not stay here. So the action of staying here should not be done by me. So that action, since we're talking about a singular action, will always have ekavachanam. Also klibattum cha, it also be in the neuter. So it will always be declined. The pratipadikam which we are creating by adding the kritya pratyaha to a dhatu, if that kritya pratyaha is conveying the action, it's the meaning of the action itself, which is if that kritya pratyaya used bhave, then the declension of that pratipadikam will always be neuter singular. That's what it says. Bhave outsargikam means the default. Outsargikam, utsargaha is the default, general. It will take the general ekavachanam and the neuter. There is a convention in this language which says samanye napumsakam. In a general sense, when you want to refer to something, you use napumsakam. You say kimidam, what is this? You don't say koyam. You don't look at masculine, negative, or a feminine form. Use neuter form. So to refer to something in general, you use the neuter form. That's the outsargikam ekavachanam klibattam cha. So if you think it's a bhave prayogaha, the way to check that is to see the declension is neuter singular. If it is not, it is not a bhave prayoga. For example, Ramena Vali Hataha. Now Hataha is singular but it's not neuter. So it could not be a bhave prayoga. So every bhave prayoga has to be neuter singular. Okay, so that is one way you can check. Could this be, if you suspect a bhave prayoga, check if it's neuter singular. If it is not, it cannot be. If it is neuter singular, you should have to make sure it's bhave prayoga. Not every neuter singular is a bhave prayoga, but every bhave prayoga is neuter singular. You understand? So to have a bhave prayoga, one of the necessary conditions is to have the declension and neuter singulars. That's where you start with a checkpoint. The checkpoint for a bhave prayoga is check if it is neuter singular. That's what this note over here says. Bhave outsargikam ekvachanam klibatvam cha. In the bhave prayoga, what's called the impersonal passive. In English, the default singular number and neuter gender is used. So bhavata shaitavyam, atra sthatavyam, and so on and so forth. So the simple meaning of the sutram is that these affixes, the kritya affixes, the kta affix, and any affix in the sense of kal, including kal, these are to be used only in the passive. If it's an intransitive verb, it can be used only to convey the action itself. That's called bhave prayoga. And one thing to keep in mind of bhave prayoga, the declension has to be neuter singular. So bhavata shaitavyam. Now, if it's a sakarmaka dhatuh, you can have a karmani prayoga. It will refer to the object of the action. So kartavyaha atva karaniyaha. We'll derive this form soon. We're going to derive this form soon. Before deriving the forms, we have to understand which meaning these affixes can be used. So if it's a transitive verb, then it can be used to denote the object. So kartavyaha kato bhavata. So the match should be made by you, ought to be made by you, maybe made by you. So now we have our basic idea of how to use these affixes, these kritya affixes and some others also. But Panini has put some special rules in 3.3 of the Ashtadhyayi. 3.3 of the Ashtadhyayi. 3.3, which we referred to briefly earlier, what we call the lakarartha prakriya, which tells us in which meanings the different lakaras are to be used. And that, if you recall that, that start from the sutram vartamana samipye vartamana vadva, which we have already studied. So that is all coming in 3.3, at the end of 3.3. This starts the lakarartha prakriya. In that, again, Panini refers to some meanings in which the kritya affixes may be used. Now, why do we need these extra rules? Because what would happen is that if Panini did not, for example, let us look at this rule itself, which is our next rule is going to be 33172, Shakhi Ling Cha. It's talking about the affix ling being used in a certain meaning. Now, but also says ling cha. So, chat krityaha, the kritya pratyaya also can be used shaki. Now, why do we need this special rule for krityaha? Because already we are told in the passive voice we can use this kritya pratyaya. It would include all these more specific meanings. As long as it is passive, we have the license to use kritya pratyaya by 3470, which we just looked at. Tayoreva krityakta kalartaha. But what would have happened if Panini did not include krityaha in these rules in 3.3? Then we would have thought that these are exceptions to the kritya pratyaha. So in order to make sure that the kritya affixes are not overruled by these rules, Panini again specifies that the kritya pratyaha can also be used in these meanings. Even though he has given a general license to use kritya pratyaya in the passive by 3470, but in order to avoid them being overruled by these lakaras, he again adds them in this lakarartha prakriya in some rules to make sure that the kritya pratyaya can also be used in these specific meanings, along with along with some lakaras which can also be used in those specific meanings. So that's what we're going to look at next. This sutram is actually enough for us, 3470. This is the main sutram here, that these affixes are to be used in the passive. But now we're going to look at 3 or 4 rules over here, specific rules in 3.3 very quickly, in order to make sure that our kritya affixes are not overruled by the specific rules. So the first sutram we look at in that category is the 33172 Shaki Lingcha. Shaki Lingcha. That will be the next sutram which you need to look at.